Hey, it's Chris Doucher for GeekNerdNet.com. I am at the 15th anniversary, the official 15th anniversary of the Calgary Expo 2022, and I'm sitting here with Scott Chantler, cartoonist, creator. He's done a bunch of stuff, True Patriot, done some work with Dynamite, Betty Page, and now he's got his own book called BIX. Yes. So we're going to talk about that. Hello.
Hello there. How are you? Good to see you again.
It's great to see you again. Thanks for doing this. I'm not going to talk too much about the pandemic. We've done that before, but this is nice, a full show.
Full show, yes. You and I were both at this show last fall when it was kind of a half-sized show. And it was nice just to be out of the house.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. But yeah, it didn't feel like a full-blown, proper Calgary Expo like this does.
Yeah, it's nice too, right? The fact that they can do it for 4 days like they usually do, and at the same time of year they usually do. So let's get right to it. Let's talk about the big book. Let's talk about BIX and give folks a rundown on that. I've seen the art and the book. It's beautiful. So if anyone's thinking to pick it up, you should pick it up. Over to you.
That's all good advice. People should pick it up. It's amazingly 2 years old now, coming up on the second anniversary of its publishing. But of course, it's been pandemic that entire time. So I'm really only out giving it an in-person push for the first time now, really. So it's still kind of my new book in a way. So it's nice. It's a project I'd had in mind for many, many years. It's a real kind of labor of love, dream project of mine. Set in the 1920s. It's about a real life jazz musician named BIX Beiderbecke, who was a white guy from a conservative middle class family in Iowa, who got into his head that he wanted to become a jazz musician and became quite a good one. And is the first sort of white musician to really contribute to the early development of jazz. And, so it's interesting. It's got some interesting reversals there where, it's a world he was an outsider in, with a guy with all of the, seeming things going for him, white, middle class, middle America, all these things. Didn't want that. Yeah. He wanted something that this other population had that America was kind of hearing and finding out about for the first time. And it's a time when black culture was kind of becoming mainstream American culture, and BIX was sort of ground zero for that transition. So he's a really interesting guy and a really interesting musician for all those reasons. The book itself, kind of formally, is an experiment of mine trying to find a way to visualize music in comics, which I've always felt comics were kind of musical. My rhythm and timing is very important in my work, and so I'd always wanted to do a book about music or about a musician. And so this was my opportunity to do that, and I wanted something a little more sophisticated than just having some musical notes coming out of the end of his trumpet. I wanted to really visualize the music in a way. So I know this is an audio thing and people are not going to be able to see what I'm talking about, but in the book, the panels kind of bounce up and down like musical notes. And the more sophisticated his music gets, the more kind of complicated and sophisticated the page layouts get. Yeah. And spoilers, he eventually destroys himself with alcohol, as a lot of people did during the Prohibition era. And also not in the Prohibition era. But the page layouts eventually start to kind of constrict, as his life constricts, and he kind of loses it. Yeah. And so, it was a real storytelling challenge that I pitched myself. Yeah. And hopefully I got there. The reviews have been good, so I hope I did.
Yeah, that's great. I love that the passion project of yours, and now it's 2 years now, but it's here, and it's here again in a sense, right? Yeah. But how many iterations when you're doing a new concept like this for yourself? You said it's a bit of a challenge, and and you succeeded, and awesome. But did you go through a lot of iterations of the concept itself before you finally landed on a spot where this is great, or was it sort of, were you improvising page to page kind of thing?
That's an interesting question, because I usually, even though I write and draw my own stuff, I usually write a few drafts of a script before I start to draw, because the writer in me wants to have the story straight before, I put my artist hat back on and start to interpret it visually. With this, I think because of the jazz angle, I went straight into thumbnailing pages. And I had maybe a 10-page plot outline that I was working from, but no script for the first time. I sat down with my plot outline and started roughing out pages. And that was kind of a blessing and a curse. I think it gave it the improvisational quality that I wanted, but also just in terms of the ins and outs of working with an editor and a publisher, sometimes it's better to have those in-between steps to show them, right? You don't want the first thing they see to be full pencils of artwork, because you might have gone down the wrong path and spent a lot of time down it.
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure I'll be doing that again.
Right.
But for this particular project, it felt like the right thing creatively.
Nice. I mean, I want to shift gears for a sec. The one thing I loved I've always loved your work, and when I met you in September last year, I told you I was pretty excited to meet you, just because it's nice to meet those behind the page, right? Yeah. And then you had these little sketch cards at the time, Betty White via Dynamite, right. or Betty Page, Betty White. Jesus Christ, she's dead.
I work on Betty White comics. Give me some Betty White covers to draw.
Betty White. I don't know how she got in the conversation, but
also pretty sexy.
Okay, so the two of them side by side. No, okay, okay. So back to those.
Yes.
Betty Page. Talk about that. Talk about your style's always been kind of in that 20s, 30s, 40s vibe. Yeah. Just how you got into that project, and you did quite a few of stuff, like quite a few of those for Dynamite. They're beautiful pieces, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I was happy with most of them. Some you could probably tell looking at them which ones I only had a couple of days.
Right.
Like, sometimes they'd call me on Tuesday and say, we need a cover Thursday, and you do your best. Other times I had the whole month to think about it and work on something. But you're right, my kind of mid 20th century is sort of my wheelhouse in terms of a look. I end up doing a lot of retro stuff because that's kind of where the vibe of my work is, which is good. It's nice to have an area that you can work like that. I'm trying to remember how that gig came about. I think an editor from Dynamite saw my work at New York Comic Con when I was there. Maybe 2016 was the last time I did that show.
Yeah.
And they tried to get me to draw the series of Betty Page. I almost said Betty White. And I can't, at this stage of my career, I just cannot afford to work for Dynamite page rates.
Right.
But they were offering a half-decent rate for covers. And so we settled on me doing covers. And I ended up doing it for 2 years over 3 different series. So, that was kind of a nice gig. I was working on BIX at the time, and it was kind of nice once a month to be able to change gears and get a little bit of money in the door. Yeah. And it was a really fun project. I'd love to do something like that again. If any editors are listening to this who've got a regular guest cover gig, hit me up, because it's a nice thing that I could do one of those in a day or two. And then get back to my book.
Nice. I want to be cliche. I want to turn back the page for a minute. I want to go back to your True Patriot work that you did.
Oh yeah.
I backed both those books at the time. Loved them. Ton of fun. Ton of Canadian creators. Jay Torres spearheaded that, right? And
yes.
And then you told me last September, which I didn't know, that there was a Comixology series as well.
Yes.
Following that. So just talk a bit about just that whole project and how it felt from it sounds cheesy, but that Canadiana perspective. I mean, the books are great and all that kind of stuff.
We used to, going back to the earliest days of our careers, we'd be at comic shows, particularly Canadian comic shows where the creators were mostly Canadian creators. And people would be talking about, first of all, we'd be talking about Alpha Flight and like what everyone would do if they were writing and drawing Alpha Flight. And that would inevitably turn to people like, well, what would you do if you had to have your own like Canadian superhero? And that kind of talk. And I think Jay Torres just heard enough good ideas over the years that he was like, why aren't we doing this? So he put together this anthology, kickstarted the first couple of volumes, got all of his industry pals, his Canadian industry pals, to create a new original hero. Everyone did a short story. And, it was really cool. Everyone got a chance to work out their Canadian superhero stuff, scratch that itch. And it was great to see in the first volume, like, you weren't really sure what you were going to get. No one knew what everyone else was working on. And it turned out everyone else was working on something so different. Like, you thought you were going to get 10 different versions of Captain Hockey or something. And, there's a little bit of that.
Right.
But, everyone did something a little different. The word Canadian superhero landed a little differently in each creator's mind. And so my character was called the Red Ensign, was a World War II era hero, kind of an attempt to do a Canadian Captain America, but in a World War II context.
And he looked really cool.
I had that costume in mind for ages. Like, I always knew what he would look like. He'd have the Union Jack painted on the round World War II era helmet, and the red shirt with the crest on it from the Red Ensign, and I always knew exactly what I would do. And it was fun for me because I did this book, Two Generals, 12 years ago. That's a very somber historical remembrance of my grandfather's service in World War II.
Right.
With the Red Ensign, I was able to do the World War II of comic books and movie serials and little kids' imaginations. Right? All the stuff that really has nothing to do with the real war, but everything to do with the way it's presented as a let's go get those Nazis,
like more the Flash of it in a sense, not the Flash, but
exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like
the Red Ensign can
that high level
can fight giant Nazi robots and all the things you might want to do that you couldn't in a more historical take on the Second World War. So I got to work out all that stuff that I couldn't do in Two Generals. That was basically my standard, was that if I couldn't do it in Two Generals, I should do it in my Red Ensign stories.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. Nice. Well, listen, hey, Scott Chantler, thanks so much for taking the time, man. Appreciate it.
You got it. Good talking to you.
Okay. Cheers.
Thanks, man.